Shawn Carney is the founder of 40 Days for Life, which is pro-life ministry of peaceful prayer and helping women. Shawn started this in Houston?
Yeah, College Station.
College Station in Texas. And now it is international. Married man with 4 children.
4 kids, yeah.
And conquering the world with pro-life. So with that, I'm going to introduce him. Please help me introduce Shawn Carney.
Well, howdy. It was great and yet humbling to be, if I'm one of you sitting here listening to the fact that we have Pope Francis now, and we're celebrating the feast day of St. Joseph, and now Shawn Carney is here to speak. I know who Pope Francis is, and I know who St. Joseph is, but who in the world is that dude? So I appreciate the clapter and the hospitality. It's always good to be at a Theology on Tap. There are no 2 greater things that the Church gives us over her 2,000-year rich history than sound theology and sound ale. And now we get to celebrate both of those and combine them. And the Dominicans had something to do with that, Father, so we can thank you as well. I got involved in the work that I never planned on being in, the pro-life movement, to the level that I am, while I was in college. I went to a Catholic school in East Texas. When you go to a Catholic school in East Texas, 92% of the students are Southern Baptists. So what the world sort of looks at and calls dysfunctional, the Church calls ecumenical. And the Catholics ran the school, but the Protestants attended it, and I was one of those few Catholics that were there. And I had wonderful, young, holy Irish priests in that school who preached about the sanctity of human life and defended life, and were very just good, sound priests. They didn't take themselves too seriously, but they took the Church very seriously and had that irreplaceable Irish sense of humor to go along with it. And so I was very attracted to the priesthood, discerned the priesthood all through high school, and then my spiritual director said, well, you need to go to college for a year just to discern. And when I went, I, of course, did what everybody does when they follow that advice. You meet a young, beautiful, holy woman. And she would go out and pray at our local Planned Parenthood abortion facility. At the time, I didn't even know Planned Parenthood did abortions. And to my knowledge, I never met a woman who had ever had an abortion. But I'm sure as some of the young men here know, that women have a lot of power over men. And so I went when she invited me to go out with her. This was a few weeks after 9/11. I was just about to start my freshman year at Texas A&M University. And I had that natural hesitation, that wall that goes up whenever anybody ever asks you to go out and to pray outside an abortion facility where the abortions actually happen. And so I was timid, I was nervous, I didn't really want to do it, particularly it was a Saturday and there was a lot of college football on. And in Texas, it is God country football. But football often gets put above everything else. And so I went. And I had what was an amazing experience, as some of you have had when you've gone out, when it's not the stereotype, it's not pro-life people acting as self-righteous Christians, screaming at women, telling them they're going to hell, and it's not women leaping out of their cars screaming about reproductive rights. It's quite the opposite. It's very quiet, it's very sad, it's very sobering, but in the midst of that, there is great hope, because there is a peaceful vigil there. No one grows up wanting an abortion, and no one grows up wanting to work in the abortion industry. And yet, as this daily activity goes on all day, and otherwise what is a normal, typical American neighborhood, there you are, able to witness the gospel, not through your words, but just by being present and praying and offering that last hope for the mom and for the baby, but also be the first sign of mercy as the mom comes out after the abortion. And so it had a profound impact on me when I first went out and saw my peers. I was 18, 19 years old at the time, and so I got very involved. When I was in college, I had the joy of hearing 5 post-abortive women share their testimonies when I was at Texas A&M University, so that got me even more involved. I ended up getting married when I was 21 years old. My wife and I dated for 3 years. We got married at 21. She's 2 years older than me. Don't tell her I said that. So she worked and supported me. I was actually on my way to law school when the local group that I volunteered for asked me to become the director. And our director then was David Bereit, who I work with now with 40 Days for Life. He is the one that originally hired me as a part-time person there, but he left and I was on my way to law school. The board of directors asked me to take over, and I kind of share that as a warning as well. Just be careful what you ever sign up for, because they may just hand the whole thing over to you. The church is very good at that. Ask Pope Francis. So I had the joy of leading this small local organization. In the midst of that, in the fall of 2004, myself and my wife and David Bereit, the man I was working for at the time and still work for, we were praying around an old wooden table. We were not in a bar. We were in our office, although a bar would have been fine as well. But we saw our local abortion numbers going up. And so we spent 1 hour in prayer, and 40 days just came to us for obvious reasons, how God uses 40 days throughout Scripture, not only to bring about change, but to call His own people back to Him, to chastise. And so we decided to do 40 days of a non-stop peaceful vigil outside of our local Planned Parenthood abortion facility. That was the first ever 40 Days for Life campaign. It dropped our local abortion numbers by 28%, but we never imagined 40 Days for Life would ever leave our community of about 200,000 people and go beyond Texas, much less beyond the United States. But then a group in Seattle called us, and then Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Charlotte, North Carolina, and we started to see interest in 40 Days for Life grow. So in the fall of 2007, we decided to launch 40 Days for Life as a nationally coordinated effort, hoping that at least 20 cities would sign up to be part of this effort where we could train our local leaders. And in the fall of 2007, 89 cities in 33 states signed up. That blew us away. And then a Lent campaign was birthed after that first fall campaign. So for the last 5 years, we've had a fall campaign and a spring campaign, and we've really seen God use something that is extremely basic, that is very simple, that's based on prayer, that's based on fasting, and take it to now 481 cities in 19 countries. And it's because of that focus at the local level and the local church of going to where the abortions actually happen. We can watch the news all day, or we can spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C., as I have to do sometimes for my job, and it'll make you pull out your hair. It gets overwhelming. But if we go and we confront abortion where it happens and maintain those other battles that we have to have in Washington, D.C., but confront this evil where it's promoted, where it exists, and take the love of our Lord there, He will work miracles. And we've seen that. We just passed 7,000 babies that have been saved at the very last moment when moms are going in for the abortion. There was one in Orange County, California, where the mom was literally lying on the surgical table and, in her own words, bracing herself for her abortion. She had the IV in her arm and was on the table, and then looked up and remembered those 3 or 4 people that were out in the hot California sun praying for her. She leaped off the table, ripped the IV out of her arm, left her shoes in the surgical room, sprinted out the lobby. Her boyfriend was reading a Sports Illustrated. He thought, I guess we're leaving. So he chased after her, stole the Sports Illustrated. The 2 of them ran through the Planned Parenthood parking lot to these 3 volunteers where they took them to lunch, and she chose life for her baby boy. And when she delivered that child, she talked about how close he was to becoming what otherwise is just seen as another statistic in our country, where we do get overwhelmed by the numbers and we forget to take this issue personally and to not fall into that cynical attitude that there is nothing that we can do for the least of our brethren, even in this situation, the smallest among us. We've also seen 77 abortion clinic workers have conversions and leave their jobs. Many of you are familiar with the story of Abby Johnson, who ran the Planned Parenthood abortion facility for 8 years in College Station, Texas, the place where 40 Days for Life first began. I knew Abby for 8 years on opposite sides of the fence. We had many conversations through the fence over an 8-year time period. But I never imagined that she would walk just 50 yards right next door into my office. When we bought the house next door to our Planned Parenthood abortion facility, we remodeled it, made it our office. We could offer ultrasounds and pre-pregnancy testing and so forth. This was when I was running a local pro-life organization, and 40 Days for Life had gone national, but we still had to serve women locally. And yes, women would come over, but I never imagined that the director of that facility, that Abby herself, who was the 2008 Planned Parenthood Employee of the Year, that she would have a change of heart and walk those 50 yards and come right into our office. Oftentimes she sat in the same place where many of the women she had counseled to have abortions sat. And I remember seeing her in her Planned Parenthood scrubs with her Planned Parenthood security card that I watched her swipe thousands of times going into her office, and she was just weeping uncontrollably because for the first time in her life she was asked to participate in an abortion. She had defended abortion, she had given media interviews, she had encouraged women face to face to have abortions, yet she had never seen her product. And all of the rhetoric and the training and the talking points went out the window when she saw the worst thing that our culture has to offer. When she saw a 13-week-old baby boy fight for his life and lose it right before her eyes. And immediately that light went off, and for Abby, she had that moment that we're all presented with in smaller ways when it comes to this issue. But she had the moment where she could either accept the reality of what she saw, submit to that truth, which was a hard truth. God often chips away at us, or he smacks us over the head with a 2x4. And Abby got the 2x4 in that situation, and it took a lot of humility to submit to the physical, scientific reality that she was seeing on that ultrasound monitor. Or we can throw our hands up in the air and just brush it off and kind of bury it and say this is just, the way things are, and this is here to stay. And Abby had the humility to submit to that truth and to walk out and to leave. She resigned 24 hours after being in my office, and many of you have read her book, Unplanned. And it's a phenomenal story of the heart. It's a phenomenal story for somebody who supports abortion. And it's just a great story of how if this person's heart can change, anybody's can change. Abby and I are now friends. And I remember after her whole ordeal, and to spare you the details, but Planned Parenthood came after us in court and their case was thrown out. There was all this drama. And after all of that was settled, I was on my way to Ireland. I had this trip planned to Ireland to see some family and friends and some good friends that are priests over there. And so I'm in the airport, and my phone rings, and I pick up, and Abby says, I just want to get something clear since we've been through a lot over the last few months. I said, well, what's on your mind? She said, I'm never becoming Roman Catholic. This is out of nowhere. And I said, well, first off, you were running a massive Planned Parenthood abortion facility 60 days ago, and now you have my cell phone legally. And so there's been a lot of changes. If I were you, I would just never say never. And she said, well, we've talked a lot about Catholicism, which we had, because when Abby left, she and I had such a long history, and it was the grace of God. There are so many scenarios she and I could have talked about. They probably would have raised some tension between us, but we ended up just talking about the church. She was hiding out in my office. I was calling around trying to find her a job, and she would look at statues or rosaries or books on my bookshelf and start asking questions, and she was drawn to Catholicism. It was almost as if she had permission to ask about Catholicism. because she was raised as a Baptist. Her parents were wonderful Baptist people. She obviously fell away from that. And there was always this interest in Catholicism because we had Franciscan nuns that would go out and pray. The Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, when they would come down to Texas A&M, they would always go out and kneel in front of the Planned Parenthood, and the workers would just think, the UFO was going to show up and take them all off and complete the whole process. I mean, it completely freaked them out altogether. But there was this, interest and desire for something greater. And so our conversations really were about the church. So for her to say that was so out of nowhere because all those conversations had gone well. And I mean, we gave her stuff to read. And of course, Abby last year came into the Catholic Church, her and her husband, after just 2 years of doing private RCIA. And it was a beautiful story of seeing, I got to be one of their sponsors, myself and one of the other staff members that worked with me at the time. And it was a very private, there were only, 20 or 30 people that came into the church in a small parish in Texas. Abby didn't have a whole lot of, family or friends there. But the priest who confirmed her knew her story and knew her when she worked at Planned Parenthood. And her confirmation name was Mary Magdalene. And when he confirmed her, the priest was tearing up and Abby was tearing up. And it was just this beautiful, full circle. And for me, I guess, why I'm sharing that with you is that all of my time in the front lines, I guess, because 40 Days for Life is on the sidewalks and we get any and every kind of scenario you can imagine. These are peaceful prayer vigils. Thank God we've never had a major incident. All of our 550,000 volunteers have had to sign a statement of peace. We've been very blessed. It's been very safe, but you just get, some nuts that come out there. There's really no other way to put it. And all of the persecution that I've seen, which some of the worst is in California. California is our largest state. We usually have at least 35 campaigns just in the state of California, 8 to 10 in San Francisco alone. And so the persecution that we've always seen is never against our position on abortion. Never. Pro-life, pro-choice, that never comes up. It's always because we're religious, and it's 90% of the time always because we're Catholic. Always. The church is at the center of all hatred of secularism. It just is. And I've now been to 350 of the abortion facilities in America, and the ones that are the most hostile, whether it's staff or usually it's the physicians themselves. There's a doctor in Reno who's by far the most hostile. He made professional billboards that say God is pro-choice. He has all sorts of horrible things he says about priests. You can use your imagination. And all of these other things just attacking the church. And yet, these women have to see this when they drive in. But nothing about abortion. The whole phrase of keep your rosaries off my ovaries, which is by far the most clever pro-choice phrase. I mean, if you're going to dive in, at least be creative. You say acknowledge the authority of the rosary and the power it can have. But all of that stems from a deep loneliness and a longing for something beyond ourselves. Abby had that whole time in Planned Parenthood, which I didn't know the level that it was. But a day after she resigned, she's interested in Catholicism. There's a void there. There's a vacuum that only the church can fill. And it's our job as Catholics to give people the biggest opportunity to fill that void. Because the world has so many more options than us because it's so much bigger than we are. At least we feel that way sometimes, like we're this minority. But we're really not a minority when we think about the power that the church offers that nobody else offers. It's like going to restaurants that are just always the same, and we're offering something unique that's a mystery that can change our world, and we have to be quick to offer that. And when we offer it, we will be surprised at who takes us up on that offer, because our Lord is attractive, and He's most attractive when He's being persecuted. these 77 workers that have left, not just left because they got mad and quit their jobs. We have those as well. That's a much larger list. But the ones that actually have a change of heart and resign and come to us and we help them get a job, all of those workers say that the biggest relief is that they no longer feel like they have to justify their job. You know, the world wants to act so sophisticated without God, that we just have it together, that we put on a good face and that we can just continue on without all of this, you know, middle-aged nonsense. And yet, deep down, there is a longing, and there's a loneliness. And yet, when that's offered, people cling to it. That's why the conclave was so well covered by the secular media. Some of the comments are goofy. You know, will the Pope be pro-life? You know, all of these. Because they don't know what to say, and you just have to fill time in a 24-hour news cycle. So we get to kind of enjoy some of the goofball comments. But it gets the attention of the whole world. You know, because we're being given a new father. And it's comforting even to the people that the other 364 days of the year will say, you know, the Catholic Church is corrupt and we have no use for it and it's trying to take us back to the Dark Ages and all of this. We still want our dad to come home, even though we want to hate him so bad. And that's what's so great about the conclave, is it reminds the world that it has a father, even if the world says it doesn't want that father, and it's outgrown that father's rules. So it's very beautiful. And these workers have really represented that. There's a lot of themes, as I've gotten to know many of them, that sort of repentant thief theme. That when things get really bad in their workplace, they realize, you know, there is a way out. You don't have to work here. One woman in Texas, who was also a manager of a Planned Parenthood, started listening to Catholic radio, which you should not do if you work at Planned Parenthood. That probably needs to be in their training, and probably is at this point. Because she started listening to it. She heard Abby interviewed. She heard a few other people interviewed. She started listening to all the, you know, wonderful programs. It was a relevant radio station. And eventually she came back to her Catholic faith, and with that, obviously realized she could no longer participate in the work that she was doing. So she resigned. We had the first 40 Days for Life campaign ever outside her doors. We put this story in the book, and she goes out there the first week, and she says, you know, I've been thinking about leaving. Is this a 40 Days for Life campaign? Like, she was so excited that she had these protesters outside of her doors. And our leader, who was just so timid to even lead a campaign, he said, well, yeah, you know, I'm the leader, kind of raising his hand, like, I guess I'm the guy in charge. And she told them her story, and she resigned, left her job, and Planned Parenthood could not find a replacement for her as the manager. And this facility was doing well. And so a month went by, 3 months went by, 6 months went by. They were forced to close this facility in Sherman, Texas, which now has no abortion provider, because they, of one heart and one mind, having a change of heart, because she started listening to Catholic radio. And so we really have no idea what's going to happen when we give that simple witness. It doesn't mean that at every moment of every day we can be screaming at people and preaching to them to repent and turn to the gospel, but we can show that through our actions. We can show joy. I think that for young Catholics, which I'm not really young anymore, I turn 31 tomorrow, so it's all over, as people know. Just kidding.
60 is still young.
Oh, there we go. I have a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 20-month-old. Three girls and a boy. Bridget, Bailey are my 2 oldest girls. Seamus is my son, and then Bernadette is my baby girl. And so this morning, my 2 oldest girls convinced me that for my birthday, I need to take them tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. to Chick-fil-A for breakfast. So we have a date tomorrow at Chick-fil-A. We're gonna stay here all night, and I'll just go straight there. But teasing. So we have this date at Chick-fil-A, and they said, Daddy, we know it's your birthday, but how old are you? I said, well, that's, I said, I'll be 31. And my son says, Dad, you're too old to have kids. That's this real deep concern. So that's going to be a conversation he and I are going to have to get more in depth in when he's old enough. At 4, he just didn't seem to understand. You're too old to have kids. But I think for us as young Catholics, there is really no excuse when we look at our secular world to be intimidated by it at all. Because we were given great examples of people who used the media and showed joy publicly, mainly Pope John Paul II and Mother Teresa. One of the priests who spent most of his time with Mother Teresa, Ignatius Press, had been encouraging him to write a book for years, and he never would write about his experiences. Well, they finally convinced him, and he wrote a book. It came out last year. It's excellent. Of course, as I say that, I forget the name of it. But he writes about these personal experiences where he was with Mother, and in one instance there was an American industrialist who flew to Calcutta. He basically left the church, saw a story on 2020 about Mother Teresa, was very moved, as so many people are, and he flew to Calcutta to write her a big check and just to see the work that she was doing. Well, when he got there, he went to the House of the Dying. There were 2 homes for the dying. And the bathrooms of the homes for the dying were extremely dirty. They were just the worst of the worst. In fact, many of the European and American volunteers refused to clean the bathrooms. They were that horrific. And some of the sisters even wouldn't clean them. So Mother often found herself cleaning the bathrooms. So when this guy shows up to give his donation, he knocks on the door, and one of the sisters answers. He asked to speak and meet with Mother Teresa, and they said, oh, well, she's in the back cleaning, and they told him he could go back there. So he wanders back there, and Mother Teresa, without even looking up, she's cleaning, these toilets, and she looks up and just assumes immediately that he's there to volunteer. So she just launches into how to clean the toilets and use less water and make sure you wipe around here and get it all right, and then just hands him the cloth and walks off. He didn't even get a word out, and he wrote back to her. Of course, afterwards he was able to give her a donation, but he said those 20 minutes of cleaning these horrible toilets where he just had to completely submit to this disgusting environment, which was so different from where he lived, to submit to that was the largest spiritual growth of his entire life. And yet Mother Teresa was just being Mother Teresa and just saying, you're here to help, let's get to work. And that's really what we need in our culture, particularly in the West. We just need to dive in. We need to clean toilets because our society is very nice. We have beautiful things. We have the best standard of living in the world, but our culture is in the toilet. We are extremely dirty. We look great on the outside, but we are extremely rotten. We do the worst things under the most radical personal autonomy man has ever seen. And that requires a cleansing. That requires us to humble ourselves or be humbled by our Lord, because our culture needs that gift of humility and that gift of cleansing. And I love that model because she's now the person that just anybody can quote and it's going to make an audience feel good. But when you obviously read her writings and you read the writings of those who are around her, it is her fundamental spiritual life, her faith in God, her devotion to the Eucharist, her devotion to the sacraments that carries her. And the world obviously has access to her wisdom and to her example, but as Catholics we have access to the same resources that she had, even though her lifestyle was completely different from us. In a place much poorer, we can get so much hope from that because we have access to adoration and the Eucharist and confession. And those are the things that are going to help us become saints so that we can clean our society and bring our Lord into the world. And all of the stories of 40 Days for Life, the whole journey of seeing now 29 abortion facilities close their doors following a campaign is due to the Holy Spirit. It's due to selfless people who are willing to go out in sleet and rain and heat and pray for an end to abortion. This Friday, I am going to Green Bay, Wisconsin. I was telling Father, in Green Bay, there's one hospital. It's the only abortion provider in the area, and apparently they are extremely divided on whether they're going to continue to do abortions there, because they've had over 10 40 Days for Life campaigns outside of this hospital, and the administration is now divided, and there's a group of physicians that do not want to continue to do abortions, and it sounds like this could be a huge victory right now for the pro-life movement. And the bishop is saying a mass on Friday, but it just shows, even in the midst of a major hospital, that this wears on our conscience. Despite 40 years of legalized abortion, this is still the most controversial issue of our time, because during those 40 years, we have been unable to convince ourselves that we can divorce the most sacred bond in our humanity, the bond between a mother and a child, and call it a choice. It's a lie, and ultimately we have not bought that lie, which is why it makes us uncomfortable. And thank God that despite those 40 years, we still take this issue extremely personal. And that's a gift that we need to cherish. And so, one of the greatest things that has ever happened throughout my different travels as far as meeting the moms, and I'll tell this story and then I'll let y'all ask questions. But I had the joy of meeting a mom in California who was pregnant, and she had gone into Planned Parenthood. She was from Mexico, came here legally, got married. Her husband immediately became an alcoholic, and she found herself in an abusive relationship. She then, of course, had to work multiple jobs to support their other children while she was pregnant and deal with this alcoholic husband at home. Very difficult life, very difficult circumstances. Then, of course, she gets pregnant, goes to the doctor, and discovers that her child is handicapped. Her doctor tells her she needs to have an abortion. She refuses and goes to another doctor. That doctor tells her, not only do you need to have an abortion, I'm going to schedule one for you. And with nowhere else to go, she goes to the abortion appointment at a massive Planned Parenthood in Los Angeles and sees 3 40 Days for Life volunteers out in front, one of whom is Alejandra Baker, who led the 40 Days for Life campaign at the time and had led multiple campaigns. It is just a joy. This woman is the saint. And so this young mom speaks with Alejandra, and they take her to a doctor who is a specialist in prenatal disabilities. And he says, your child's very disabled. We can't even give you the details because we still have to run some tests, but you need to choose life. And she chooses life. I got to meet her while she was still pregnant with her baby, a baby girl. And I remember being in an event similar to this, except it was at a church. And they introduced this mom and sort of shared her story, and the audience clapped, and she just had tears running down her face because you could tell she had never had any affirmation in her entire life. And from the beginning, what she knew was right, all she had had was, in her mind, very well-educated professional people telling her, your baby's not worth anything, you need to have an abortion. And yet to have an audience welcoming her, and Alejandra had arranged, transportation for her other kids. They had gotten her free medical help through this physician. They had helped pay some bills and really helped this mom get back on her feet. And she gave birth 6 months later to a baby girl. The baby girl was born with no legs and a cleft palate. And I asked, what she named the baby girl, and she named her Milagros, miracle. And whenever I saw the photos of this beautiful baby girl, it was one of the most moving experiences that I've had in the pro-life movement, of just seeing the courage of this young mom who's a hero. Well, I wrote about this in the 40 Days for Life book, and when I contacted her, I wanted to get her permission to use the story and use some of the things about the visit that just really impacted me. And I told her, look, I'm going to change your name, and I'm going to change the location so that your identity is protected. And we had to do that for various scenarios in the book because of the sensitivity of what was at stake. But she was the only one that said, I don't want you to do that. I want you to use my real name, which is Rosa, and I want you to tell the story using her name, so that one day when my baby girl is old, she can read that chapter and realize how much God loves her and realize how much I love her. That there are no circumstances that will determine the value of her life. That she is made in the image and likeness of God, and that she really is indeed a miracle. And the whole attitude of this mom to not want the abortion in the first place was the same reaction that I got when I approached her about this story being in the 40 Days for Life book. And it's just a beautiful testimony that now we want to cleanse our society of handicapped children, and yet it takes this woman with just nothing going for her. Her job, her marriage, her health, and yet everything is going for her because of her faith in God and her humility and her willingness to do the right thing for her children, for her own flesh and blood. It was just a beautiful story, and that's really, that's the humility, and that's the joy that we have to approach life with. And it's stories like that that show that abortion will end in our nation, because we cannot logically map out on paper who should be born and who shouldn't be born, because that's not how the human heart works, and that's not how the soul works, and ultimately that's how abortion will fall. And we will continue to build a culture of life through our basic day-to-day activities within our own families.
There have been a string of incidences in the news lately. Last month, Dr. Carhart lost a patient during an abortion. And then just this past week in Delaware, there was an elderly woman attacked. Her phone was, she was hit and knocked down. And that's like the fourth time the ambulances had been there that month. So I'm seeing these kind of reports more than I've ever seen them before. They're just a lot more. I can't really think of them off the top of my head. And I can only think that, well, it's good news for pro-life because it's bringing national attention, and it will get our government's attention to what's going on here. So you could comment on that.
Yeah, and the Carhart situation is particularly more known in this area because he moved to Germantown, Maryland, put the largest late-term abortion facility on the East Coast in Germantown, and the woman who died. We had some 40 Days for Life volunteers out there, and they saw her go in, and she was obviously visibly pregnant. And when she came out, she just looked absolutely awful. She looked pale, and they knew something was wrong, having been out there so many years and seeing patients come and go. And then, of course, she went to her hotel room, and they could not get a hold of Dr. Carhart. And he flew back to Nebraska, did abortions the next day. She died on a Thursday night. He was doing abortions in Omaha on Friday morning. And this is somebody we obviously have to pray for. But there are occasionally these stories that show how evil that side of it is. And I think they are going to end up pressing charges against Carhart. And these are situations where it is what it is. And you cannot have an abortion without taking the life of an innocent human being. And it also shows an industry that's been around 40 years and is getting lazy, because these stories just, back to back, happen a lot. And Carhart's had problems in Omaha. Bizarrely enough, I was in Omaha speaking outside of his abortion facility during a 40 Days for Life kickoff event, and the next day found myself on a 6 a.m. flight seated between he and his wife. That's crazy. Long story. It's in the book. Whenever you have these late-term abortionists, which are very rare, they have an attitude that is them against the world. And Carhart has that. You read an article online that he did in Newsweek. It's very condescending. He says we are at war with pro-lifers. It's a very militant attitude, and it really has to be at that point. I mean, think of what he has to justify and what he has to rationalize. The other situation in Delaware, which Sean Hannity covered last night, so that's become a major news story. That was our 40 Days for Life volunteer, and her name is Ray. She's a 63-year-old grandmother, and she had noticed the ambulances had been coming, so she was filming them and documenting every time that they were there and taking down the times that they had come. And this last time that she was doing it, which was just the other day, one of the workers came out and attacked her, and of course she had her phone camera on, which is great, and it got the whole thing on camera. And this is really something that, so often we're accused of being violent, or we're the religious zealots, or we're the militant people and all of that. And some pro-lifers, unfortunately, haven't been pro-life and have caused violence and hurt the reputation of the pro-life movement. But ultimately, the harassment that we get from the other side is unbelievable. And these scenarios really show that, especially the one in Delaware. And so overall, when you go to a 40 Days for Life campaign, none of this stuff is going to happen. You're not going to be attacked. The most persecution you'll probably get is somebody will tell you that you're number one with their middle finger. But other than that, it's going to be, it's not going to be very hostile. And that's really, even talking about the workers, the first 2 weeks of the campaign, they just hate the volunteers. They don't acknowledge them, or they're very cold, they can be very harsh. But by the third or fourth week, it's rained, it's sleeted, there's a little bit of respect there, and they just think, these nice people, they don't have anything better to do, they're all into their religion, they're not bothering me, so we'll just leave them alone. But by the last few weeks, they're over all of that, and they really start to look at the reality of what they do. We've never had an abortion facility worker, besides Ramona, leave early in the campaign. It always happens the last week. We're in the last week of the campaign now. We had 2 leave last week. We'll probably have 3 this week leave that we've been working with, because it's at the end, and this is worn on them. These people, a lot of times, have been working in this building for years and have really never questioned what they're doing, objectively. And if you were outside praying for an end to Taco Bell for 40 straight days, even the most logical, rational person would eventually, if they drove by there every day, go, maybe Taco Bell is evil. And I've just been missing something. Just because we have that, it has that impact. Taco Bell's not evil. It's great, especially if you're in high school. But that's going to happen even if there's no one out in front of a Planned Parenthood abortion facility, because in and of itself, it's controversial. In and of itself, it divides. Yet if you're out there, it's that public witness that we don't stand for this or tolerate this. And women don't have to go in there. There are other options. And so it's even more powerful, and it has an influence on the workers. And as I mentioned earlier, so many of them say, it's such a relief that I don't have to justify my job anymore. I mean, no matter where you work, you don't spend every minute of every single day justifying where you work. They have to do that because of where they work, and we don't. And that's a huge relief when they leave. Yes?
Yeah, appreciate you coming in. Great, speech reflection and all. Great experience, very inspiring. I was just wondering, on the college campus, for example, Hopkins, the group Voice for Life that's coming back, John Bolton started this coming back, and student government is seeking student government approval. And of course, that is saying that it could be considered offensive, so it's against the university code, whatever. So, we're going to try to go back for a vote again and try to persuade them to understand that, it's another great option in this charity and the Softball Council is certainly unoffensive.
Sure.
So, any ideas for that? And then the second thing is, it's in the pro-life movement, it's not a lot of African Americans, and I believe that if African Americans got involved, like the Civil Rights Movement, working with other nationalities, other people, it would be much more powerful because of the zeal and zest and everything else. And what is 40 Days for Life doing to try to get some of those African Americans involved?
Absolutely. I'll do the second question first, and then you can remind me of the first question. the African American community is devastated by abortion, over 40%, and it's the highest of any other minority. 40 days. One of our good friends is he's an African American abortionist who he and his wife did abortions for a decade. His wife actually trained him to do abortions. She was an OBGYN. He's from Los Angeles, grew up in a very just crazy world, and ended up becoming a physician. And when his wife got pregnant, that's when they became pro-life. His name's Dr. Haywood Robinson. He's phenomenal. He was featured in Abby's book, if you've read that. He's in our book. He's on our board. He's also chairman of the board of Learn, which is a national organization that reaches out to African American pastors specifically. He's the chairman of that board as well. And this is something that we cannot do enough of as a movement because abortion is not affecting anybody more than African Americans. It's just not. And Planned Parenthood builds many of their facilities in minority-driven areas. The largest abortion facility in the Western Hemisphere is in downtown Houston, right next to the University of Houston, but it's in a huge Hispanic area in Houston. It's known for their Hispanic population, and they put this 78,000 square foot abortion facility, and the African Americans and the Hispanics joined together to oppose that facility before it opened, and especially now afterwards. They actually have a Spanish pregnancy center that's parked outside. It's an RV or a mobile unit, and so that's the first thing, is that we cannot do enough on that. And if you haven't seen Maafa 21, it's an excellent film. It's a great film, and Dr. Alveda King, who's the niece of Martin Luther King, she's excellent. She was one of the first speakers I ever invited when I became the director of a local pro-life organization, and Alveda is awesome. I've seen her in meetings in D.C., and you'll have some just big name, people that everybody would know, who's a senator or congressman, and she'll just say exactly what you said, except like turned up times 10. I mean, basically, when are we going to stop killing black children? And she'll say that to senators who are pro-life, and it's great because she is a driving force that we don't really have other than her, who can go in to the black community and has the credibility, and she tells it like it is, and is post-abortive. She's had abortions herself. Okay, on the John Hopkins thing, I would always, the language of that has to be just, so delicate, of using activism as education. Occupy Wall Street would be allowed on any campus in America because everybody hates corporate people because they're evil and they have money. And for all the nutty things that Occupy Wall Street does, it's all in the name of education. Well, more so, 40 Days for Life, or anything pro-life for that matter, has to be in the spirit of education. To educate, it often involves activism, as Occupy Wall Street does, or women's rights, or any other cause. And that's the way to tie it in, that it's not violent, that it's not confrontational, that it's educational, and that it allows people an avenue to think about or rethink abortion. Justice for All does a great job of this, because they get on some campuses that I'm very surprised at. And so they're experts at this, but always use it as educationally based. Make them reject that. Put the ball in their court to where they have to turn you down for getting your intellectual message out there simply because they disagree with it. And the two institutions you have to reject in order to justify abortion are science and religion. You have to reject the two institutions that built Western civilization to what it is today. And they do that when they silence us.
Do you think in the larger pro-life movement that there is a place for that type of strategy?
Absolutely. Yes, there is room for graphic science, and I've used graphic science for certain things. And again, going back to the educational settings and college campuses, debates, there are very well done professional brochures that can be used that I think are always good to have out at a facility in case people come up. I one time was out at a vigil and PETA came by. PETA's given us problems in certain parts, you know, and they you come out and ask us, do we know what they do to those chickens? And we have to resist from saying, no, but whatever it is delicious. It's terrible. But there was one ongoing conversation, and the guy was very well intentioned, and he was going on about just the very graphic nature of how they cut the head of the chicken off and all the stuff they have to do to a chicken. And I listened to him, and he said, I want to show you these pictures, and they're awful, and you're not going to be able to eat chicken ever again. And I kind of got nervous because I thought, if that's true, my life is ruined. But I said, you know what? That's fair. But if you show me your pictures, allow me to show you my pictures. And so I looked at all the chickens. And then, you know, I said, this is what abortion, you know, does. And we had a pamphlet that on the outside had an explanation, all that. And then you open it up and had the graphic pictures. And he was just mortified. And he said, how dare you show me that? And just went off on this tirade. And I said, listen to yourself now. You just spent the last 20 minutes justifying everything that you stand for with PETA based on these pictures of these chickens. And I show you a picture of a Holocaust that's real and that is done to our brothers and sisters. And that's the difference. I can't be outraged to the level that you can be outraged. Because ultimately, I don't care about the chickens, and neither does anybody else, as much as they do human life. No matter how much we love chickens, we can't love them like we love humans, and we won't react to them like we'll react to humans. And that was the difference between our reactions. And it's always good to have that as an option, and certainly in, I don't know if many of you are familiar with Randy Alcorn. He's similar to Scott Klusendorf. They go around and they debate on college campuses and defend life, and they will always ask if at some point can they use, for educational reasons, you know, it does us good to study Holocaust, to study, you know, what the Nazis did to the Jews and some of that graphic nature. Doesn't mean we need to look at it all day and get ourselves roused up and end up crazy. But we do need to be aware, and in certain settings, it is appropriate. Not at a abortion facility. I think it can cause too many problems, and I've seen it have the reverse effect. And there's just too much data that shows women don't respond to that. Some do, and there are stories. If they see an aborted baby and they choose life, but it's not that often, and it turns people away, and it turns our own people away. Sadly, that's just the reality. Okay, we should probably wrap it up. Thank you all.